opportunities that come with it in your respective jobs. And then in the third round, we are going to be looking at the future, see how things are evolving and what could be done, maybe. So let's try to keep it dynamic. It's going to be relatively short answers, and then we will have a little bit of time to interact with the public. You can already start asking your questions if you wish to, or through the Slido chat, by using the code hashtag EDL2025. And then at the end of the round table, Marius will gather your questions, and we can ask them to our speakers. So let's begin with the first round by looking at how language skills matter in the day-to-day for your different profession. Each of you has a different perspective, very different careers, and each of them has opened doors for you. So I'm going to ask Cedric. Cedric, eres un...
Cedric, you are a magnificent polyglot. How many languages do you speak?
Hola.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for your question. I speak 22 languages. And these include French, Spanish, Italian, German, Portuguese, Turkish, Chinese, Russian, Serbian, and more. And I start to count them once I've reached level B1, because I have actually studied more languages than that. I've studied about 30 languages altogether. But once I hit B1 level, well, taking that as the threshold, I speak 22.
Están emocionados ahora. Solo cuenta a partir del B1.
The teachers will find that very interesting. You only count from B1 on.
Quizá te la pregunto en francés.
Now, the second question, I'll ask it in French, because you're a native of Belgium, so you speak French and Dutch, and you have since you were very young. So I wanted to ask you how those languages have influenced your career.
Alors, j'aimerais d'abord dire que
Well, first and foremost, I had a real passion for languages from the start. I wanted to learn languages, and I think this has echoes in the answer to the first question on the Slido quiz. Why do you learn languages? Well, mainly to discover more about the world, to understand other cultures. That's what drove me to learn languages. And when I spoke quite a few languages already, then the thought struck me that I could find a job to use those languages. So it was kind of the reverse. I studied the languages and then thought about what a job I could find to use those languages, which I found in the Red Cross office, the Welcome Center.
Fantastic, merci. Alors, je passe à Madalena.
I'll move on to Madalena.
How many languages do you speak?
Limba mea maternă este româna.
So my mother tongue is Romanian. I'd like to say a big hello to everybody. Good morning to you all. So in school I learned English and Russian, not because I had to, but because I enjoyed it. I thought it was always interesting playing with the musicality of different languages, and I think for the same reasons as Cedric said, I thought, you know, the way people spoke different languages was musical. I wanted to travel like you all. And I also wanted to discover new worlds. So I spent, you know, my whole life learning foreign languages. I learned Spanish, I learned French, German, Swedish, Portuguese as well. I'm currently learning Luxembourgish, and I speak a little bit of Chinese as well. But in my everyday life, I mainly use 3 languages. And I do want to say that Cedric speaks Romanian as well, so I want to ask him, how did you learn Romanian? Could you let me know?
Mulțumesc. Am învățat limba română singur.
Yes, well, I learnt Romanian by myself. I taught myself. It was the last major Romance language that I hadn't yet learned. So I took it upon myself to learn Romanian. I had a book that I focused on and I practiced with friends as well. And I was working in the House for European History here in Brussels, and I got to practice my Romanian there a lot. So little by little, I learned the language that way.
You're all amazing. It's very inspiring. I'm going to turn to Joe now. Hi, Joe. So how many languages do you speak?
Hello. Well, not quite as many as my former colleagues, just four, more or less, more or less. English is my first language. I grew up in the United States, and in pretty much a monolingual environment where I grew up. But I was always fascinated by languages. And so my first additional language, or my second language, was Spanish, which we started when I was about 10 years old at my school. And it opened doors for me because I discovered a whole new world that was actually in my own country, because Spanish is the second language of my country, of my city. Then when I got to secondary school, I decided to start studying German. And I did this because I wanted to study a language that was not in the same family as Spanish. Spanish is a Romance language. I wanted to study a Germanic language to kind of complement. At one time, I spoke German very well, but I've experienced a bit of language loss since I moved to Barcelona in the 1990s. My fourth language is Catalan, and I speak it basically because I was coming to Barcelona to do my last year of studies in Spanish at university, and my university offered an introductory course in Catalan, and that opened lots of doors for me, which I can talk about later.
Fantastic. I'm going back to you, Madalena, because I want to ask you how languages have shaped your career.
Competențele lingvistice.
Well, I'm going to reply in Romanian. I hope that's okay. Good, I'll go ahead then. In terms of language skills, they really defined my career path. And I made a lot of changes throughout my career. I initially wanted to be an engineer, but 2 months before the university course started, I actually switched to a different option. And I decided to focus on journalism and communication because I wanted to choose a more creative profession, you know, something to do with words, with ideas. And I don't think I would have made that jump. I wouldn't have been able for it without my language skills, because it was really, you know, a last minute decision. And in order to do that, in order to succeed, I needed, you know, solid Romanian and English language skills. And then throughout the course of the rest of my career, I learnt a number of different foreign languages. And because of that, I was able to move from communication to translation within the European Commission. And I've now, you know, moved again and come a little bit back to engineering, although it's in a little bit of a different ways. I'm talking about engineering in terms of prompt engineering, where, you know, it's all about finding the right words. But I do think that my language skills are a real asset to me when it comes to communication and AI in particular.
Absolutely. And maybe, Joe, you want to say a word? I mean, obviously you've been working on as a language teacher, but you want to say anything else about how languages have shaped your career?
Yeah, first of all, in teaching, most of my career has been devoted to teaching English because I live here in Barcelona. And but before I came here, I actually taught Spanish when I was studying as a graduate student in the United States. And actually, at my university, they asked me to teach an introductory course in Catalan for students who were going to spend their year abroad here in Barcelona. So in terms of teaching, yes, the three languages, English, Spanish, and Catalan, have had an impact. But in terms of my career, in the second half of my career, at my university, La Universitat Oberta de Catalunya, I became involved in language teaching management as the director of the Center for Modern Languages. And interestingly, the language that was most important for me in this position was Catalan, the one of the four with the fewest number of speakers. But it was definitely a good choice for me to start studying Catalan when I did. It really opened doors for me.
Thank you, Joe. Every language is important, the big ones, the smaller ones, especially to oneself. Your mother tongue is always the most important, right? So now we turn to Jenny now. Jenny, how many languages do you speak?
Ich habe 5.
So I work from 5 languages: German, English, French, Spanish and Dutch. And when we talk about working languages and interpreting, we're talking about a language that you have at C2 level.
And you are choosing to speak to us in your second mother tongue, which is very good because we are celebrating multilingualism. How have languages shaped your career, Jenny?
Ja, du hast es einleitend.
Well, as you said in your introduction, I'm an interpreter with the European Commission in Brussels. So for me, languages are part of my everyday working life. I grew up bilingual, speaking English and German, but I do want to say that that is not a precondition by any means to becoming an interpreter. The majority of my colleagues grew up in monolingual environments, and then throughout the course of, school, work, career, they learnt languages and added languages. And I did that too. In addition to my mother tongues, English and German, I learnt French and Spanish. I spent time living in France and in South America. And originally I didn't really want to work with languages. I started out working in a purely English speaking environment in a consultancy. But I did quickly notice that I missed languages and that I had an ability to be able to communicate between different languages and different cultures. And I felt that was part of my personality, and I wanted to pursue that in my career as well. So that's why I turned to interpreting. And, as our audience said, as interpreters, we work with the spoken language, with the signed language. So every day, I take part in conferences like the one you see here. I'm sitting in an interpreting booth and I get the opportunity to use all my languages on a daily basis. And I get to improve them on a daily basis too. In addition to the languages I work with, I do have some basic Arabic as well. I got to know my husband learning Arabic in Morocco. So, not only have languages shaped my career, but they've also played a huge role in my family and personal life as well. And I wanted to ask Cedric, you talked about learning German as well. How did you learn German?
Deutsch habe ich an der Uni.
So I studied German at university in Brussels. I did a BA in languages, in German and in Spanish. And then I spent some time living in Heidelberg in Germany. I spent a brief period of time studying interpreting there, just a year, and then I left that course and instead I moved to Taiwan to learn Chinese. But then I moved to Vienna. I started a new master's course there on international development. And I finished that master's there, and that master's was entirely through German as well.
In fact, Cedric, you have learned languages in so many different ways, no? Sometimes you take a book, make friends, sometimes you travel, sometimes... You've done a couple of Erasmus, I believe. Erasmus is very important because this is a program that the European Union is offering to all of the students to be able to live and speak languages in other countries. So I want to ask you still something else, Cedric, before we turn to the second round of questions. Now we've known you a little bit better, all of you, but you are not a commission worker, you are a social worker. You are dealing with diverse communities every day. How do your language skills help you to build trust and provide effective support on the ground?
Well, to answer your first questions, I participated in 2 Erasmus programs and 1 Erasmus internship, so 3. In terms of what I do at work and how language skills build trust, I think it is quite obvious that language skills build trust. At work, we have tablets at our disposal if we need them to use translation apps, for example. Since most of the time I don't need them, I can directly talk to the people and have direct contact with them, connect with them more easily, and help them more efficiently, I think. It is, I mean, at my job, it's quite obvious that if you know the asylum seekers' languages, well, it definitely helps and makes a huge difference, especially in emotional situations where people are angry or sad. Just imagine having to tell them to calm down if they're angry, using a tablet, translating. It makes a huge difference. So, yes, there are no doubts about that.
Yes, it's totally obvious to all of us here, I think. It is good to have those tablets, I think. It helps, but nothing can replace a Cedric in his 22 languages when it comes your way. So now I'm going to turn to round 2, technology and transformation. The impact of technology in all our jobs, because we are all being impacted. They are transforming education, transforming work. So I'm going to go to Joe. Hello, Joe, again. What are the most promising ICT tools that you've seen for language learning, and how are they changing the classrooms?
Okay, this has been evolving over the years. I've been involved in using technology for language teaching and learning, for more than 20 years. And so things have changed quite a bit. There are basically 3, I think, areas I could comment on. One is on creating content. Teachers can create interactive content relatively easily using various tools. These could be quizzes, video quizzes, branching activities, etc. And one program that seems to work fairly well, and it's fairly user-friendly, is H5P. That works quite well. Also, using technology for collaboration, student learner-to-learner interaction, supporting that. One tool that's been around for a while, Padlet, is quite good, and it keeps evolving. Originally, it was a board that you could post virtual Post-its to, and now you can do video, now you can generate images, and actually they've just come out with a collaborative group space that can be used, right? And thirdly, I would comment on generative AI and Gen AI powered tools. These can assist teachers in creating content efficiently without taking up too much time. And if used wisely, they can also support learner autonomy so that students can go away and study and practice on their own. And some examples of this would be, you can get feedback on your writing. There are lots of tools that do this. You write, your essay, and then you upload it and you'll get feedback on it. And you can now get extra speaking practice with voice chatbots. I've been playing around with ChatGPT, and the voice function works fairly well now, so that you can have conversations. I've had conversations in English, and I've also tried it out with Catalan. It seems to work pretty well. So that's an area that I think should be explored more and more.
Yes, very good tools indeed. I also invite participants after our talk to go and explore. We have a teacher's corner in the exhibition hall with many tools, including digital tools that teachers can use. Do you want to give us a word also, Joe, about what are the main challenges of using AI and ICT tools?
Yeah, there are quite a few, actually. One, data protection and GDPR compliance. There are tools available that can be used for free, but a lot of these tools cannot be used in certain countries due to restrictions. And sometimes it's not clear what can be used and what cannot be used. I know that in many countries this has been worked on, and also the Commission is working on this, coming up with guidelines on what can and cannot be used that is data protection friendly. One thing institutions could do is to provide their schools with a closed generative AI account, so that teachers and students are not feeding in, they're not putting in their data into a system. These are secure environments that have safeguards to protect people's data, right? Also, another issue is equity and access. The digital divide is still something that many areas are struggling with. Just not schools, but also, do the learners have access to technology once they go home, right? To learn autonomously using the technology. Can they do that? Another area is the over-reliance on technology. There is a risk of less interaction, critical thinking, and probably one of the biggest risks that teachers, I think, are aware of is that AI, for example, can be used to circumvent learning, right? You can get AI to do your tasks for you. You can get AI to do your essays for you and they come out perfect. That doesn't promote learning, right? Other areas, the reliability, quality of AI output, fakes, and things like that is something that should be brought into consideration. Enforcement of stereotypes, bias, et cetera, et cetera. And finally, teacher training. There is a need for teacher training for the effective integration of technology, and especially now for AI. How should it be used? How should it not be used? And it's especially challenging because things are changing all the time, and very, very quickly. So it's not just, we did a training and you've got it. It's actually something that needs to be ongoing and iterative, right? And a lot of sharing needs to go on amongst the teachers. But anyway, okay.
Absolutely. It's hard for teachers to keep up because this is developing so fast. And indeed, for young people, it's just so easy to turn to ChatGPT. I keep telling my son, think first what you would answer and then maybe check your answer, but don't start by asking ChatGPT. But I don't think he's listening. Let me turn to Jenny now. Jenny, in your experience as a conference interpreter, how have technological developments changed the way you work?
Yes, thank you, Anna. Since you're asking about technology quite broadly, maybe I'll start talking about that. I think there's perhaps two areas where we've seen some big changes over the last few years in the interpreting world. One has to do, of course, with more powerful IT tools when it comes to document sharing, document management, just the way in which we interact with information and we gather information through our screens and the internet. I think that's really come along in leaps and bounds and has brought some really concrete advantages. Being able to just access your online dictionary when you're in the booth, those sorts of things, I think have been very helpful, and those developments have been ongoing for, a couple of decades now. Another big technological development in interpreting was brought on, I'd say, by the COVID pandemic, and that was a shift towards more what we call RSI, or platform interpreting, remote simultaneous interpretation. So to not have to be in the same physical space as other meeting participants in order to provide the interpretation service. Now that, as I say, I think was accelerated by COVID. I remember in 2019 attending an event where these platforms were being presented to the interpreting community, and us thinking at the time, oh, it's got so many challenges that it's probably decades away. But then, of course, during COVID, when we couldn't all meet in physical spaces, the developments really took off. So I think that's been the biggest overall technological shift in the interpreting world of the last few years. And it has, of course, some advantages, like opening up multilingual access in meeting venues where it might not previously have been possible, simply because there wasn't space for the booths or because you couldn't get a team for all the languages together in the same space. But it does, of course, have some disadvantages, such as not being able to communicate directly with your team or with the other meeting participants, being so reliant on technology working well, and for interpreting particularly important, having excellent sound that you can interpret from. Now, of course, the big discussion here today, and I think for interpreters as well, is AI. In my day-to-day work, I haven't seen a huge impact on how we do things in the booth due to AI. I think there are some interesting ways in which we might use it, particularly when it comes to meeting preparation. But something that Joe said really resonated with me about an over-reliance on technology. And, of course, AI can put together a multilingual glossary much more quickly than I could, or summarize a lengthy document much more quicker than I could read it. But that preparation that I do as an interpreter is crucial for when I'm in the booth and I'm having to react in real time to what's going on in the room.
Let's talk a moment about context. How important is to know the cultural context in order to avoid misunderstandings?
Extremely important. I think for interpreters, not just cultural context, but any context. And this is where humans still have, and I think for a long time will have, the edge over anything that is automated speech translation or AI, because if you're in the room, you can rely on all of those contextual cues to avoid embarrassing situations or reputational risk. Such as, just choosing the right level of formality. Sometimes it can be a simple question of knowing how formal you need to be in your output language. But also, if someone is introduced simply as commissioner or president, to not misgender them in your interpretation. Those are the sorts of things where, as a human, you instinctively respond to the context, and AI simply is unable to do that for the time being.
Absolutely, very important. Madalina, let me turn to you now. You work with language and AI at the intersection of both. How do you see the language skills evolving in the age of prompt engineering and machine translation?
I see that as AI becomes more advanced and more used, language skills become more valuable, not less. I see them evolving into hybrid skills, meaning deep mastery of language, cultural context awareness, combined with AI literacy and prompt engineering capabilities. I think that if you have these two, meaning linguistic expertise and AI literacy, is a far more valuable skill, let's say, mix of skills, than having either on its own. So a linguist who can also effectively prompt AI, who can critically assess the output and knows when to intervene, will be probably more employable than just a person having only language skills or a person having only tech skills.
Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. I need to ask you this because it's something that people are wondering. Are emerging technologies going to be able to replace human language professionals?
I was expecting that question. AI replaces tasks, not humans, in my opinion. But language professionals will have to adapt and upskill. I see new opportunities opening up. AI trainers, large language model evaluators. We have language data curators, even conversational AI designers, where you improve the interaction, you make it more human-like, the interaction of a chatbot or a virtual assistant with humans. I think these are all new roles that we must be aware of, and I don't think AI can replace language professionals.
What about the other speakers? Do you tend to agree with Madalena? Just briefly, because the clock is ticking. Cedric?
I think that AI or robots in general could potentially replace social workers, for example, but I don't think they would do a better job, because in the end, robots are not human, and where I work, we work with asylum seekers who come from war zones, their countries are usually in bad condition, and they come here hoping to find people who will help them, support them, understand them, connect with them. And if they have to talk to robots all day, who might understand their language quite well, but does not have the same emotional skills as human beings have, I don't think they will be very happy with that, and their condition might even worsen because of that. Imagine if someone is having suicidal thoughts and the only thing they can talk to is a robot. I can only imagine how worse it can get.
Absolutely. Empathy, they don't have, they're machines. That is a key advantage we have. Jenny, a word from you?
Yes, no, I'm obviously going to agree with Madalena on this one as well. There's been some very interesting tests done by the World Health Organization and the Council of Europe on what we call AST, automated speech translation, which would be the equivalent of AI interpreting, basically, on real-life speeches in contexts that actually happened. And the results were quite clear that AI can simulate fluency, but that it doesn't replace the human analysis, and that often the output provided misleading information, wrong information, insulting, damaging, all sorts of risks go along with that. Now, that doesn't mean to say there isn't space for AI tools. I think there's a lot of research being done into what we call CAI, computer-assisted interpreting, where you might use AI tools to help you interpret, but certainly for the time being, both the segmentation issue, so the problem that AI cannot keep up in real time, it needs more of a unit of meaning before it can actually provide any kind of decent output, whereas human interpreters do that much more quickly. So I think both in terms of that and in terms of the trustworthiness of its output, we're not going to be replaced anytime soon.
Joe, what do you think?
I also agree with everything that's been said so far, and I especially like the comment that Madalena said before, that it's not going to replace humans, but it will replace tasks, and I agree with that. I'd also like to add that it's changing the roles in teaching, and that's my area of expertise. Teachers now, I think back to when I first started teaching language, and it was before the internet, and the teachers were the providers of input. We provided all the input along with the textbook, right? But we didn't have any other sources of information to give the students, and the students didn't either. But this has changed drastically in the past 30 years. Now, for example, students have access to lots of things, and they're actually doing lots of practice online. And what they need is somebody to guide them through all of this. And this is how the teacher's role has changed. The teacher has gone from the provider of all of the input for students to now the curator and designer of activities. That's a huge change in teaching. I don't think, just to sum up, that teachers are going to be replaced by AI or by technology in general, but their role is drastically different from what it was before, and it's changing that quite a bit, right?
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's very important what you have said, that this role has changed for teachers. I'm going to jump to round 3 because the clock is always ticking. So we are clear, for the moment we are still important, the humans. But let's think about what's coming, how we can advise to the next generation also in preparing for the future. I would like to ask Cedric first. Can you give us an example of a moment maybe in your work that made truly a difference, that you were human?
I think I have many examples. I think every day at work I could find an example of a situation like that. And an example of why human beings are still important and why languages are important, of course. The other day, a Turkish man got a bit angry because another resident had almost slammed the door against his daughter's face. So he started yelling. He became very frustrated. I went to him and I started speaking Turkish. And when he realized he could speak in his own language freely, he just started expressing all his frustration he had been having because he was living in our center and had to leave Turkey for his personal reasons. And once he got it all out, and we just started having a normal conversation about how I had lived in Turkey, in Istanbul, which happened to be his city, and I just started sharing my experiences. And he literally said at the end of the conversation, "Wow, this is what I needed. I just needed someone who could understand me right now. And thank you for coming to me now and speaking my languages. This made a difference."
I can imagine. And Jenny, I'm sure you also have had some moments where you thought, thank God I understood that.
Yeah, well, I think coming sort of back to the world of interpreting, there's a lot of aspects that come across in one's own language, a lot better than they would speaking a second language, and certainly being interpreted through a machine, like emotions, humor, nuance, the context that we already talked about. And I see it every day in meetings when people are able to express themselves in their language so much more eloquently and convincingly, I think, than they would, either through a machine or through the vehicle of a language that they're not as comfortable in. Because I think when forced to speak, in a different language, you have a really limited set of tools or set of ingredients that you can use. Whereas when you can speak your own language, you have access to all this richness and all these different flavors that allow you to show your personality and be much more convincing to the audience that you're talking to. Just thinking about if machine interpretation were to become the norm, I do see the risk of us humans ending up conforming our communication style to fit the machines. I think we already see this with AI-assisted minutes. It can be a good tool, but it only works well if the meeting is well structured and the AI can sort of follow what's going on. And there can be benefits to that, but you are conforming to the machine's limitations, and I think that carries the risk of sort of stifling spontaneity and natural free-flowing discussion.
Joe, let me turn to you now. How can the policy and the education systems better support the development of both the language and the digital skills that we both need in a complementary way?
Okay. I think I could mention 3 areas in which this could be promoted. First of all, digital literacy. Promoting digital literacy not only amongst learners, but also amongst teaching staff is key, right? This would include the critical use of AI for not only gathering information, but also as a learning tool, right? And going back to the idea of autonomy, learner autonomy, well, we need to teach students how they could use the tools to learn, not to circumvent learning, which they already know how to do, right? But actually to learn, right? And also things such as, recognizing fakes, recognizing misinformation, bias, et cetera, et cetera. This is all linked to the idea of digital citizenship. And on this note, I'd like to mention 2 projects that are working in this area. The EU's Digital Competence Framework for Citizens, the DIGCOMP, And also the ECML, the European Center for Modern Languages eLang Citizen Project, is working in this area. This is like things that I think could be brought into language teaching, but it needs to be promoted at a higher level as well. Secondly, teacher training. As I said before, teacher training is key. It needs to be continuous because technology is always evolving. We're talking about AI a lot right now in a certain context, but I think if we had this conversation 6 months later, we'd be talking about other things as well. So professional development is key, and it needs to integrate language pedagogy and the effective use of digital tools and AI, right? And thirdly, what we've found in the ICT Rev project that I'm working on, teachers lack time, right? And as I said before, teachers' role has changed. They become designers of learning activities for their students. This takes a lot of time, and there's no way that only one teacher can do it all. So it's really, really important for sharing opportunities to be promoted. We in the ICT Rev project have a digital platform that we're using so that people can share their learning activities using technology, using AI, et cetera, so that people don't have to reinvent the wheel all of the time. And I think that's key, and that needs to be promoted. Right? Those are the three main areas I would think about: the digital literacy, teacher training, and platforms for sharing, which are really important.
Thank you very much, Joe. I invite again all the teachers watching us, go to the Teachers Corner, explore the website of the European Center for Modern Languages, lots of resources there. Explore the European School Education Platform, lots of resources for you there. We try to make it easier for you. It's not easy. Madalina, what advice would you have to organizations and policymakers to prepare for integrating these technologies effectively?
People-wise, because we can talk about aspects that Joe mentioned, like data protection issues and infrastructure and governance frameworks. But people-wise, I think that first they should build hybrid teams where they combine tech and AI literacy and knowledge with communication and linguistic expertise, and then invest in the reskilling and upskilling of their staff for them to acquire the competencies required to leverage their expert knowledge with AI tools.
Thank you, Madalina. We have little time left, so I would like to ask you all now, just in like 1 minute, what advice would you give to young people who are wondering whether investing in language skills is still worthwhile in today's tech-driven job market? Maybe you can start, Madalina, and we go around the table.
I think language is not just a tool. It's how we connect, create, understand each other. From my own journey, I've seen, and it's been mentioned today a lot, languages open doors, not just to jobs, but to people, ideas, and cultures. And now, working with AI, I see clearly machines can process words, but only humans can give them, can understand them, give them true meaning and feel what they mean. And yes, I would say invest in your language skills. They're not just useful, it's what makes us human. And I think that will always be an advantage.
Cedric?
So although it depends on the field of work, I still think that it's usually very important to learn and know many foreign languages in Europe, or especially here in Brussels. But besides the fact that it helps you to find a job, I actually wrote down 15 reasons why I enjoy learning languages. I have them with me here, and I would be happy to share them with you today or some other time.
Do give us a couple of them.
The first one is it makes the experience of traveling completely different and much more rewarding. Another one that's really important is it makes you more aware of the world. It gives you the possibility to travel without leaving where you are. It's a great way to make friends. It makes it harder for others to scam or deceive you and helps you stand your ground in a discussion. It's an intellectual challenge. It gives you a discipline and a routine. It's like a puzzle that you decipher bit by bit. And for me, it's addictive, especially because the more you know, the more you want to learn.
And it's not the whole list, but it's very inspiring already. Jenny?
I'm going to very much concur with what my two previous panel speakers have said here. I think language skills, they open doors to all sorts of places and encounters and experiences that you can't even imagine when you start off on the journey. And it is hard work. It's a sort of a challenge and a puzzle, as Cedric has said, which can be very fun. And at the end of the day, it's not just the language skill itself, but also how you acquire the language, the discipline, the interpersonal skills that you build whilst learning the language that really stand you in good stead, no matter where life takes you. And I think that the sort of curiosity and the openness and the communication with other people that we get when we're learning another language is not something that we can just abdicate to machines if we really want to, sort of solve all the significant challenges of our world today. I'd agree with Madalena that learning languages simply enhances our humanity, and I think that human connection and creativity are going to become even more valuable, in today's tech-driven world.
Joe?
Sorry, I was having problems with my microphone. I completely agree with what everything has been said. It does open doors for jobs, for professional development, et cetera, but it makes you human. It shows respect for other people, other cultures, and as Cedric said before, it inspires trust. And I think that's really, really important. And one thing I'd like to stress is that not everybody needs to get to B1 or B2 or C1 or C2. Just a little bit is fine. If you're traveling to another country, learn a little bit, learn a few expressions and things like that. That's wonderful. And that does inspire a little bit. It shows respect and it inspires trust, right? And on another note, one thing that we haven't talked about is the effect that language learning might have on our overall well-being. I attended a really interesting webinar just last night given by Thomas Bach from the University of Edinburgh, and he pointed to research evidence that shows that points to the fact that perhaps using and learning other languages may delay the onset of dementia, amongst other cognitive benefits, et cetera, right? So that's one thing to keep in mind. Oftentimes, we don't think of our brains in the same way as we think of our bodies. We kind of know that we need to, care for our bodies. We need to go to the gym, or at least sign up for the gym, et cetera, et cetera. But we need to think of our minds in the same way. And perhaps one of the best exercises for our brain could be language learning. So I would keep that in mind, the kind of well-being aspect, the keeping your brain active so that it doesn't go soft, I think is really, really important.
Thank you for bringing that up. Indeed, there are a couple of extra reasons. Oh, they were on Cedric's list, actually. So they are not new to him. But okay, it's good that you mentioned that to all our followers, Joe. So how are we doing on the questions? Marius?
Yes, we have received actually quite many questions, so our participants are clearly very interested in our discussion. Some of the questions that we have seen in Slido have been, to some extent at least, answered by our experts in the meantime, but there are a few questions that we might still ask to our speakers. One of the most popular ones is actually a very concrete question that participants are asking. Which languages are going to be actually the most in demand for the jobs of the future?
Does anybody want to address that? Otherwise, I can always turn to the Eurobarometer results. We asked the citizens this very question last year. But Madalena?
I'll be brave. I think it's very important for people to have really good linguistic competencies first in their mother tongue, and that is important to keep alive by reading not only social media feeds but also actual books and talking to real people. But I think right now in AI, the most used language is English. Okay, AI, large language models are not yet fully multilingual. They're not as smart in other languages. So I would say, of course, English remains one of the asset languages, but any other language you enjoy learning.
I think that's a very good answer, and moreover, I refer to the manifesto that we published for our anniversary. Every language is equally important. And then it depends on your circumstances. Also, who are your neighbors? You know, like English, of course, but not only English. Mariusz, do you have another question? Because we are running out of time.
Yes, actually, people seem to be very impressed with the number of languages that Cedric speaks. And there are many questions actually to Cedric. People would like to know, how did you learn all these languages and how do you keep them balanced? Don't you mix them up? Don't you confuse them?
I get questions like that almost every day, so I'm used to it now. So I'm going to try to give a short answer. I lived abroad. I lived outside of Belgium for about 6 years, and during these 6 years, I lived in about 9 different countries. And my main purpose each time I went to each of these countries was to learn the local language. So I spent 5 months in Spain, 1 year in Germany, 1 year in Taiwan, a year and a half in Austria, 7 months in Poland, 5 months in Turkey, 3 months in Egypt, 3 months in Lebanon, 3 months in Cyprus. So in total I've lived in about 10 countries, including Belgium. And the fact that I was living in those places helped me a lot, obviously, because I could speak it. I could speak the language every day. I'd wake up and speak to people. I was mostly living with locals, so I would even practice when I was at home. I would try to do things in the local language outside when I would go to work, go to class, and I would try to really immerse myself the whole time into the language. And of course, I spent hours and hours studying each of these languages. It doesn't happen. If someone tells you that they just woke up knowing a language, don't believe them. You need to study. I still study now. Today I study every day for about an hour or 2 hours a day of pure studying. But then when I work, I speak at least 10 languages per day, both with asylum seekers and with my colleagues. And that helps me to maintain them, to practice them, to not forget them. And I'm still learning more languages. I just went to Georgia to practice my Georgian, and that's it.
Going back to the manifesto for motivation, the number one reason that people are motivated to learn is they have an opportunity to use the language. If you see that you can use them, then of course that's the one motivator. Mariusz, another one to close?
Yes, maybe one more to Joseph now. Some participants are wondering what the potential impact of AI is on the student's ability to learn. As it might seem, the participant is asking, the AI does all the work and there is not much left for a student to do.
That's a true threat, really. AI could be used, it can go one of two ways. Either in the positive way for learning or in the negative way in which students use AI to circumvent learning, as I said before. I think it's key for us as educators to understand how people learn languages, right? And to convey that to the students, right? So that they know, for example, that when we assign them to do an essay, that we're asking them to do an exercise, right, with your brain. Put the language, use the language that you know, and put it on paper, right? Don't ask AI to do it for you, because then you're just circumventing learning. And one thing that seems to get through to students with the importance of writing is that when we tell them that writing is good for rehearsing for when you're going to have a conversation later, they kind of understand that, right? So writing is really, really, really important for language acquisition. It allows you to rehearse. It allows you to practice, to put into practice what you already know. It helps you to identify what gaps you have in your knowledge, et cetera, et cetera. That's just one example. If we can convince them that this is important and that they do it on their own without going to AI, they can go to AI later for feedback, that's fine. But not for circumventing learning. But I think it's a process of educating people in how languages are learned, right? And Cedric could probably give a course on this, right? So that's just one example, but there's lots of others. It can go either one way or the other. It's going to circumvent learning, or people are going to use it to enhance learning, and that's what we're hoping will happen.
If I may, this is why AI literacy is so important. It's so important to be introduced in curricula, because we have students and human beings generally who don't know how to use AI critically. They don't understand it. They don't know how to use it critically. They don't know how to evaluate its outputs critically. And that is very important to learn. AI literacy is important in order not to circumvent learning, and know how to use AI responsibly and for your own good.
It's so hard to close this conversation, because I think we could stay here forever. You've all been amazing speakers. Thank you so much for joining us here. I think that after today's discussion, we can conclude that despite the many opportunities that are being brought by technology, language skills remain a key asset for employability and mutual understanding in Europe. So do continue learning. We've been talking about many reasons, and we haven't explored them all still in depth enough. Thank you so much to the public for joining this celebration of the 25th European Day of Languages. But remember, it's not over. It's just this part of the roundtable that is over. You can still find the speakers, myself, and many other colleagues from the European Commission in our virtual platform. So go to the exhibition floor. It's going to remain open with us until 1, but then it will keep also open for a few more days, about a week, so you can still explore the different materials that are exposed there. And you can watch the recording, for instance, of this roundtable if you've missed it. Also, remember you have a function. You can take a picture of yourself at the photo booth, share on social media. always with the hashtag EDLLangs. For any questions on the platform, please consult our staff on site behind the info desk. We are always happy also to hear what the audience thinks about our events, so we can improve for the future. So we've prepared a 1-minute survey, if you still can afford that minute. Share your opinion via the QR code that you see now on the screen. Thank you so very much for joining us, and please come back next year for the European Day of Languages on 26 September. Thank you all.